t-shirt. They are now all at the registration desk. So please take one before you go. With that, we're going to get moving into the Ignite presentations. Quick reminder from yesterday, and for those who were not actually here yesterday, Ignite presentations are not quite lightning talks, which are the fast talks people are used to hearing. Ignite talks are very specifically 20 slides, 15 seconds a slide. So it's a very challenging talk and a huge challenge for these speakers. So I thank them for taking on that very difficult challenge. So first up, we have Ed Legault, 20 plus years in IT, TDD master, Docker file master, and wrangler of 4 girls. So yeah, I'll let him take it away with mutation testing.
All right, thanks, Kyle. I get to follow up right after lunch. So as he said, this is about mutation testing, has a really cool name. What is it? I find this to be an interesting concept, so I wanted to just bring this up and talk about what it is and why you might want to give it a try. Oh, there we go. Okay, so what is it? It's software that can be run during a pipeline or any sort of build phase to detect any false positives in your unit tests. Just like when you run your unit tests, you could then also run mutation tests to find out if you have any false positives. How does it do that? Your code itself is mutated, and then your unit tests are ran again to find any passing tests. Basically, if your code's mutated the way you're going to do it here, none of your tests should actually pass. Mutations are things like it'll change if something's supposed to be greater than, it'll change it to less than. And I'll go over what a few of the other mutators are that it'll go through, but basically it goes through your code and changes around a whole bunch of stuff, conditionals and other things, and anything that still passes in your unit test is considered a failure or a mutant that lived on. So that's why it goes through the whole mutant theme. So this winds up really letting you know that your unit tests may not be verifying what you think it is. Maybe you had some lazy coders that needed to get through a coverage check and just had it hit all the lines of code but didn't actually verify anything. This makes sure, or is one way you can do it to where it actually verifies your stuff. So what are some mutators? Well, it'll do things like it'll change your increments. Where you did plus plus, it'll change that to minus minus. It will remove calls to void methods, because then, hey, maybe you didn't verify anything that happened in that void method, for an example. It'll change your return values, so it'll change things to null, insert incremented. Does some math stuff where it'll change around your pluses to minuses, multiplication to division. Again, it's going through fiddling with your code, then running the test against it. It'll negate conditionals, invert integers, minus, plus, things like that. There's a whole bunch more. These are just most of the time when you hook this up the first time. These are generally the defaults you get out of the box when you want to run it all. It'll also change boundary, like if you just have less than, it'll do less than equal, all that sort of fun stuff. So again, it's just going through your code and fiddling with it like crazy and making sure all your tests better fail. Again, there's many more. These are pretty much the defaults. If you can look up for your various language here in a minute, I'll go over what some of those different frameworks might be for the given language you might want to try this out on. So some considerations when you do this. This process takes a while because it's fiddling with a lot of code, so it's going to make it take longer. Instrumentation of your code, doing it this way, it takes a lot longer than when you're instrumenting for coverage. So keep that in mind. You may consider doing this check maybe as a nightly thing or as a Sonar plugin, and you're like, maybe you report on certain things on a nightly or weekly or on a per release basis. You may consider running this as one of those checks and go through and checking the report later. You may need to exclude certain files or classes depending on how your code is structured. So it would be yet another thing you might have to maintain an exclusion list over time. So if you wanted to get this in, that may be one extra thing you have to do. Also, if you use something that already does some byte weaving, fiddling of your code already, like PowerMock in Java land, for example, it may not work because that's already done some byte weaving of your code once, and then you're going to go do it again to go check this out, that it may or may not work. So what are some of the possibilities, depending on your given language, if you want to try this out? In Java, there's PIT, and it's pittest.org. Spoiler alert, as I go through these, they'll all be up there if you want to get a picture of them all. JavaScript, there's something called Striker. You can go check that out. I gapped these slides, so I got like 15 seconds. I gotta talk and be like, hey, how was lunch? Cool. Awesome. Trying to remember which one I got next. Might be Ruby. Ruby has something called Mutant. So yeah, definitely go check that out. How's everybody doing? All right, yeah. I should have had more on here now that I'm realizing this format is, again, this is interesting. I think I got Python next, MutePy. That's cool. Check that guy out. Again, this is cool. You can run this, see how long it takes. Man, our unit tests are awesome. This also means you actually have unit tests. So there's also Sonar plugins available, which is probably by far the easiest way to do it. Turn it on if you are already using Sonar and throw it over there and see what you get out the other end. Again, a good way to know, hey, coverage checks are one thing, but you can fool those. This is one way you can do it. So I just want to point out this exists. Go check it out. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Ed. So next up, we have a member from the Snafu Catchers organization. I had to say that again last year, and I'm not saying it this time. And has her master's degree from right here at OSU, currently a cognitive systems engineer. Clearly the smartest person on the stage right now. So please welcome Marissa, I'm about to say it wrong, Melissa Grayson. Marissa Grayson. Wow, I got my R's and L's confused. Okay.
Yeah, you can ask me later what cognitive system engineering is. So, my name is Marissa Grayson, and today, in 5 minutes, I want to reframe how you think about incident response in DevOps, particularly because there's someone or something that you're leaving out of the room. Your automated tools are fellow responders. They actually have models and thoughts in their own particular way. And when we do postmortems, we focus primarily on the people-driven changes. So I'm not talking about automated tools like, the future AI, but your tools do react. They do adapt and respond, very similar to how we do. So we have to think of them as cognitive agents, particularly how they respond to stress or saturation. Just like in a sponge, you can absorb so much that you cannot respond anymore. And there's 4 different types of responses that you typically see in this reaction. So response 1, shedding load. We see this in dropped requests. People can drop work as well, but that's often with other ramifications. Response 2 is reducing thoroughness. So this can be seen as increased latency or decreased performance in certain components. Basically, they cannot handle things at the normal rate, so they have to slow it down in a way. Third response is recruiting resources. So we can see this in terms of spinning up new virtual boxes or opening up new connections. People often do this by recruiting new expertise into the situation to ask for help. And then the last response is shifting work and time. See this in asynchronous threading or even timeouts, where you're pushing the current demands into a future state that you can handle it. So these 4 different types of responses are seen both in people and in technology. So they're also tactical and strategic. Tactical meaning immediate relief, or strategic looking a little bit long term to try and manage resources. So with this framework, we can look at incidents as opportunities to actually understand our automated tools better. Because it's so much easier to actually think of the automated tools as reacting in different ways. And that's why we're so interested in DevOps as a unique opportunity, because both technology and people responding to anomalies. So this is from the Stellar report that you can find later. But before you take this new worldview out into the world, There are a few challenges, have to admit, to working with automation. So the first one is strange loops. So this is actually when a component provides a function that relies on its own functionality. Basically, for something to work, it has to actually work first. And it can be a very strange loop. Masking is another challenge, where we see that one symptom is masking or hiding another. And you see this all the time with error messages in one place, far from their origin, which goes into another issue, concurrent issues, where multiple things might be going on that may or may not be connected. And it's very hard to tell. And then the last issue I'm going to mention is measure limitations. You are what you eat, or in this case, what you code. So error messages are only giving you a small portion of the information in a very limited context to be able to figure out what's actually going on. So in this case, we need new perspectives, contrasting perspectives when we're looking into systems. Sometimes the data that you need to figure out a problem is right around a corner that you don't have any eyes or ears on, but you still need to know. And so there's another issue that you have of generating hypotheses. You share information in chat logs to try and mitigate problems. And companies like IBM, New Relic, Netflix are trying to extract those ideas. My main point is this. Automation is not a person, but the processes you build help you to mitigate the risk of overload. And so they need to be part of the conversation. Challenge you all, if you want to learn more about why I think saturation is such an important issue, go to this link, look up this paper, and find out a little bit more about how you can reframe the way you think of your own system. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, next up, it's your turn. So for those not familiar with it, we are about to have Ignite Karaoke. I'm going to allow Matt to lead and do the full-fledged direction. So.
Give me 2 seconds, please.
Thank
you. So, can you all hear me? Awesome sauce. So, Ignite Karaoke. What is it? Ignite Karaoke is just like the regular Ignite with one major difference. You don't know what slides are going to come up. And in fact, I wrote code, so I don't know what slides are going to come up. I'll give a quick demonstration, talk for a few minutes. But while I'm speaking, if you would, please come on up, those who would like to. And we're going to do this a little bit differently. We don't have a lot of time today. So we're going to do Ignite Karaoke Lite, the WWE edition. So people can actually come up, do a slide or two, and when they think that they're done, tap the next person. And then they get to take over. Hopefully there's enough people that I don't get tapped for like the last half. But seriously, it's a lot of fun. You don't necessarily have to talk about what's on the slides. If you want to, great. But don't feel like you have to. And I actually am going to need the mic. Okay, cool. So if you just hand it to whoever comes up first. All right. So like I said, I wrote code. I'm going to prime this. And I'm going to give us 50 slides. All right, and here we go. I press the magic button. It gives us a 5-second countdown before the first slide comes up. Like I said, I have no idea what's happening. Fail first and change things. This is an awesome way to start. You know what? Me standing up here with no idea whatsoever what's going to be on the slides, there's a good chance I'm going to fail. you know? But you know what? I gave a couple years ago. Yeah, well, you know, lubrication often, part of it is us speakers. Talking is a very dry thing. So we need to be able to have ourselves lubricated. And then, you know, tools work a lot better when they're lubricated. Keep them up, do what you need to do to maintain your tools, and so forth. And they'll be happy and make your life so much easier. You want to come yet? Not yet? Okay. All right, so bamboo. Bamboo, some places it's a tool for HR. It kind of is, but you know what? Bamboo grows fast, and it changes, and it is used for a lot of infrastructure.
Children also grow fast, and when you need to have a conversation with your child about DevOps, the first one is always very difficult. You're never sure if they're old enough to learn about DevOps. It doesn't matter whether they're the size of a baby elephant. You're going to have to get your hands dirty in this conversation. You're going to have to explain to them merge conflicts. You're going to have to explain to them working with others. All the things that they are eventually going to learn in kindergarten, you need to apply that to DevOps. Also, you have to be mindful that, and teach your kids that in DevOps, you will find very unique personalities everywhere you turn. You will see things that may not fit your normal perception of like what you would expect an organization or people to work with. You also have to be mindful that just because you can do something doesn't mean you should build it. Be extremely mindful about what you put in your hands and in the hands of your users and your developers. Last one slide and I'll hand off. And the last thing is you got to teach your kids that there are going to be expectations when they start to do DevOps themselves. And they have to be mindful of how they communicate up to the people who are asking for things when it comes to DevOps.
All right, everybody, come on, do it. Yeah, come on.
Is this a metaphor that I'm not getting that I can vamp off of? Because I'm not getting it. Like, it seems like these all are tangential to some part of DevOps. I'm not getting it. It's the bus. Get on the bus with the train. The bus? We're getting run over by the bus. Okay. No, there's someone living by the bus. This is Black Sheep with Dick Savage, who was not Gary Busey. Yes, Gary Busey. Okay. Yes, exactly. I'm just going for 90s nostalgia because, yeah. There we go. I am not. I am terrified. This is, yeah. But this is, you know, especially as a DevOps engineer, just getting it from all the different angles. It is good. We do like when you appreciate all the things that we have to do now because you always butter us up when we are actually doing something for you, and then when we actually get it, you know, it would be nice to get a little bit of appreciation on the back end. So if you're showing that they are happy now after we are bending to gone, is this taken outside? Happy trees. This wood is yellowish, so I will go Robert Frost in this, and there is a road diverging. So a couple of poets in there, yeah. So. Good. Cosplay is important, and
it's a Mandelbrot set.
It's a what?
Mandelbrot set. Fractals.
Yes, it is. Which is yeah. So there's a sigma, and this is if you can't bite your own tail, bite someone else's. So, and now I'm gonna hand it off to yeah.
All right. Hello. So this is me feeling like this has scared me looking at all the DevOps, everything people doing. There is about like 2,000 different tools and frameworks being created every minute. And me looking at, oh my God, which one do I use? And like everybody claiming their tool is this, the fastest, the best. You get on it, you're going 400 miles an hour, you're faster than everybody else, you're seeing everything like crystal clear. Like that movie, like your best favorite movie star, you are becoming this, using their tool. Some claiming you're gonna become an airplane. You're gonna fly through the entire world. And like airplane carrying the load of a cargo ship. Like that's what they're claiming. And like, again, we all know, this is the reality. You're sitting there, everything is on fire. Like you were saying, you know what I have is fine. I'm on fire, I'm okay. Because, again, we all die. So, I mean, it's okay. So, this is actual DevOps people like running through water, getting scraps, just making it work. Making your 90s monolith still work in 2019. And you are just like running through the water with a stick in your mouth. But again, this is the state of your application. It's dying, it's decaying. But DevOps is the glue and duct tape that's holding it all together. Well,
Oops.
again, you saw error pages before. And this is not even actually a picture. It's like I have nothing else to say, so I got an error slide. And that was my time.
Thank you. Anyone else? Come on, it's fun. Jump in the pool. Come on. Come on. Yay! All right. Ready?
No.
Well,
Right.
in
There's a lot less people here than I thought. Where'd everybody
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
go? There you go. That's about how you should feel at the end of the day, every single day. I don't ordinarily test my infrastructure, but when I do it in production. And I think a lot of us probably live in that space. And what we need to do is we need to start moving it back, telling people this will be the face they see if they don't start moving to dev. Because if you're not in dev testing, that guy's going to be on your doorstep. So I don't even know that language. So yeah, but alternatively, if we're doing our jobs right, we're all going to be able to build this amazing, beautiful little ship in dev, and then we can put it in a jar and put it in prod, and no one will ever touch it. Because all of our automation tools do everything. It's how we actually climb the hills of day-to-day technology. So everything's beautiful when you're in nature, and your automation tools are that road that are going to take you up the route. Alternatively, though, you can't always be headed in the forest. Sometimes you're just a dude with a sweater, and you're out there coding the best you can. I mean, not all of us are Unix engineers with vests on, but, you know, whatever. We wear our sweaters. We do the best we can. But a lot of the times you're going to find yourself lost in a giant city of amazing tool sets and opportunities and have nowhere to eat a sandwich. So you'll eat it at your desk. You'll be miserable. You'll put in those long hours, probably not see your family, but you're doing it for that, which doesn't exist. So it's like, I guess it's love. It's not even money, but do we really love it? So we're enticed by money, but at the same point, it's on fire just like your environment. So at the end of the day, though, you got to realize it's about the unicorns, and that's what's going to make your job hell. So never, ever, ever sign up for the unicorn task and give that to the FNG. And I don't even...
See no evil, speak no evil.
Yeah, sure. There's lots of evil. Just put it on someone else's back. So do your best you can, and maybe you're going to be sitting in a beautiful spot and making little eggs with all your friends and failing together. So that's all I got.
Anyone else? Okay, I'll jump in. You got to have good tools. And sometimes the best tools are the simple tools. Just because it's old, just because people have been using it for a long time, doesn't mean that it doesn't work. Now, you want to automate, and it's kind of hard to automate a pencil, but you know what? A lot of people in DevOps give ITIL a bad name. ITIL is actually not that bad. You know, they say, you want to have change control. Well, we have source code repositories. You can actually be doing ITIL and it's Agile. And that red dot, my cats have actually figured out, some of them, that I'm doing it. And they see me pick up the mouse, and they're like, oh yes, we get to play now. And as soon as I do, they go, watching the light going off into the universe. Yeah. So I have right now, we're down to 4 feline overlords. They pretty much control our life. But you know, that's good. That's good. Because cats, they force you to have schedules. Now, this is kind of what it looks like for some of our schedules for code releases. and for our velocity reports, especially as we're doing initially starting a project. But you know, we all want to go out into space, have a very successful liftoff and a product launch. Yeah, how many times do we actually get to have a product launch on time? Well, roughly within budget, but you know, in order to do that, you have to be balanced. You know, you got to be able to juggle things. Look at the world in a different perspective from what you normally would.
You said you wanted to be tapped out, so I was just here when you were ready.
Oh, okay. Here, go.
All right. You ever say to your mom what you do at work? This is pretty much how you're going to feel at the start of that conversation. I told my mom that one time, and we ended up having, she looked at me glass-eyed. She's like, I don't understand anything that you just said. What I really need to understand is, why is my iCloud full? I don't get it. I was like, well, Mom, you just have to pay. She's like, but it's the cloud. Why do I have to pay for anything? Then I followed up with, Mom, you do realize that in the cloud, it's a shared system, right? All of your photos, all of your information, it's sitting beside other people's information. So you might want to be really mindful about what you're sharing, particularly on something like Facebook.
And that's the last slide.
Oh, perfect. That's how I end. I was hoping for something to save me.
Well, thank you. Thank you, everybody who participated. Now, you as an audience also participated. Hopefully, next time you'll join in and participate up here. Thank you much. We have time to kill.
No, well, I mean, you got like 2 minutes.
Okay. I mean, I could do more if you don't want that air.
Yeah. Leon, are you here?
Is Leon in the house?
All right,
Who lives in a house? So right now at 1:30, we'll go to the 3 different tracks. So we'll have the open spaces as well as the presentation in here. And then,
Space topics are posted on Guidebook.
yes, so if you go out to Guidebook, you'll see the open spaces topics posted. They're actually 4 individual postings. Not like yesterday where you had to open it up and actually see what was going on and in which room. They're actually 4 individual postings.
I had more than that. Kyle told me I had 10 minutes.
Yeah, you had like 20-some. 25.
All right.
You're supposed to go till 125.
135?
125.
125.
Yeah, so we're
I got 5 minutes.
Yeah,
I may as well keep going.
fine.
Okay. Hey, I apologize. I thought I only had 10 minutes. So if anybody else wants to play, please come on up. Test. All right. Let's see what comes up. Like I said, I apologize. I thought I only had 10 minutes, and I had more. So because of that, I'm going to fill the existing space because, as we all know, everything grows to fill everything that you have. You know, you're going to fill it out on your board. And hey, unicorns again. Everybody's chasing the unicorn. You know, they talk about these companies that are valuated over $1 billion. You know, some of them have yet to produce a product, but they're still worth $1 billion. This doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but you know, the important thing about it though is you just got to be prepared. Anybody? Hey,
That was not me.
yeah, cool.
No, I just have fun.
going,
The
that's
words were perfect. I was like, all right, he'll look back here eventually. And he said, prepare. I'm like, yank.
Thank you.
Do you want the lapel or a handheld?
I don't know. Yeah, like really early. Oh man.
Yeah, I'll do the introduction. Which do you want to use this? If you're going to stand here, use that. If you're going to walk around, then you want to go back.
I prefer to walk around.
Okay. Go ahead and get my thing.
In that case, I could probably use the clicker.
Yes.
As well, right? Hello, hello. Oh, nice. Actually, looks pretty good. Trusting your ingredients. Devopsdays Columbus, and me. I think we're good.
Okay.
Assuming that people in the back can hear me too. I mean, I have a rather loud voice, but. Yeah.
No, he was just like checking.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, you always have to check. And it could be like on the shelf. Yeah, it could be. Just saying.
Is it? I'll try to make a pirate joke.
I have no idea when talking about it. Is it really? Yes. That's how we've been doing September 19th. I had no idea.
Neither did I. Darn.
Huh. That explains why I can't understand half what you say.
I mean, it's also meow like a pirate day. Look. So if you can do that better, then that might be.
No, I failed.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's pretty much it. Sorry.
That's hilarious. I had no idea. I knew.
Yeah, so there's this awesome website called checkiday.com, as in check holiday. I use it all the time. It's one of the best websites ever.
Or is that Kyle? It is not. Okay.
Am I getting an extra laptop?
I doubt.
Oh. I mean, I kind of like it.
Can I take it?
Yeah, I mean, I thought I'll take it. I can totally use it on a laptop. Yeah, I'm okay with that.
I'm not against it, but I just have to have a external keyboard. Mouse.
Yeah?
So how do you pronounce your last name?
Stichter.
Stichter.
Yes.
Got it. All right, we're going to go ahead and get the morning going. So we've got Leon Stigter to talk about trusting your ingredients.
I know, right?
What ingredients are we supposed to trust?
So actually, that's a good question. And I told this story to a bunch of people before. When my wife was making cheesecake, my wife loves to bake. So as she's seeing this record, yes, I'm very lucky. As she's going to see this recording, she's going to be very happy that I mentioned that. I hope. And as she was walking through how she makes cheesecake, I'm like, well, that's almost the same, sort of the same steps I do when I write my apps. Whether it's using Go or Node.js or whatever, it's relatively similar. But I totally realized that we just had lunch, we just did karaoke, so I did want to get started with a game of Jeopardy. Any non-Americans in the house except for me? Okay, good. So does everyone know what Jeopardy is, though? Do you know what Jeopardy is? Okay. Sorry, just... That's fair. Okay, I should have asked any non-Americans and non-Canadians in the house. Okay. So what we're going to do, I'm going to have up here like two statements, one at a time, obviously, and I'll just get started. So this software project caused a giant security breach and compromised the personal information of as many as 143 million Americans. Does anyone know the answer to this? And by the way, in total Jeopardy format, you should... No, I wasn't asking for the company. That would have been right, though. But the software project. What is Apache Struts? But I like the Equifax answer. That was pretty good, too. Okay, second one. An attacker could exploit this by using a malicious tar binary to write files to any path on the target machine whenever. It is one of the largest software projects in the world that a lot of people, I'm guessing here in the room, use as well. Almost. Anyone? No. No? What is Kubernetes? And this was a very recent exploit. Good. So now that we're all like super shocked about the stuff that we're using in production today.
I mean, I always...
Oh yeah, me too, but you know, that's a different story. Really? Okay, I was going to say that's a bad idea, but we'll get to that. Exactly. So I work for VMware, and I am part of a team called Cloud Journey, and what we do is we talk about taking your apps to public cloud. So for us, it's really important, while we totally realize a lot of people use VMware's resources on-prem, that a lot of people are moving into the cloud. And with Cloud Journey, that is what we do to help you facilitate that. So by the way, if anyone's expecting me to be here and sell you VMware stuff, that's not going to happen. Okay, I'm seeing no one's leaving. That's good. So by the way, if anyone's wondering who I am, so I'm a Leon Stichter, developer advocate, passionate about things like serverless, containers, and pretty much everything that runs into cloud, either public cloud or private cloud. And I love dad jokes, cheesecake, and Go. So that's also why this talk is about cheesecake. Sorry? Good point. The programming language in this case. Yeah, I'm not that great in the game Go. I tried it a few times. It wasn't really my thing. So it is DevOps days, so I did want to talk about DevOps like real quick. And what is DevOps? And as you talk about what is DevOps, to me it sort of means destroy every version on production servers. Good. However, a lot of people, and I hope everyone here as well, would sort of look at this as what is DevOps. You know, that infinity symbol talking about everything going from building to deploying to production and doing that in a continuous fashion. And then a few years ago, we thought, you know, probably we should add some security in there. We should add some DefSec Ops. And what is DefSec Ops? Well, to me, it means that you add security to anywhere in your CI/CD cycle. So I think there are like 3 Ps of DefSec Ops, and we'll get to each one of them as we walk through what a chef does and what an FDev does. And I think it all starts with protocol. So that's like the what of DefSec Ops. I mean, it's things about implementing zero trust, not trusting anyone except for hopefully the people that you work with. Second is process. It's how. How are you getting your stuff into production? How are you working with the people that you hopefully trust. And this is all about how are you adding that security into your pipelines. And then philosophy. Why are we doing this to begin with? And I mean, that is true for both making cheesecake as well as, or any type of dessert for that matter, if you're not a cheesecake fan, or writing any type of app. It all comes down to why are we doing this? And sort of staying in the security corner a bit, who actually cares about security? Yeah? Okay, I see a few people not raising their hands. That is slightly worrying. Slightly worrying, and I'll tell you why. So I worked with a company called Risk-Based Security. They do massive research on security breaches. And in the first quarter of 2019, more than 1,900 security incidents were reported. And that is up by more than 55% versus last quarter, versus the first quarter of last year. That is massive. And more than, in those 1,900 incidents, more than 2 billion identity records were compromised. That is up by almost 30%. That, to me, is massive. I mean, almost 2 billion PII records, personal identifiable information, that was exploited. So some interesting facts. I mean, there are 3 breaches that have caused more than 100 million records to go out. The business sector is targeted in pretty much every case. And hacks are pretty much every type of breach that we have. And then my absolute most intriguing fact from that report is that 14.7% of all breached organizations were unwilling or unable to disclose the number of records that were exposed. I mean, if you're unable, that's a really bad thing. If you're unwilling, that's maybe even worse. Because in that case, someone stole someone else's identity, or at least some information, and isn't willing to share how that happened or why that happened. So now that we talked a bit about security, why that is important, and how that fits into DefSec Ops, let's welcome our 2 main characters to the stage. First of all, because we're making cheesecake, I brought a chef. Because I like go, you'll see a bunch of gophers. Second of all, because we're also going to build an app, I also brought an app dev with the cute little laptop. And these characters are drawn by Ashley McNamara. She has an amazing repo up on GitHub, so if you want to check it out, absolutely check those. So what does a pastry chef need? I mean, if you look at what a pastry chef does on a day-to-day basis, in order to make a cheesecake, he's going to need ingredients, he needs a recipe, he's going to need some kitchen aids like a whisk, a bowl, a spatula, stuff like that. They're going to need appliances like an oven, a fridge to put things in, and obviously, at least in my case, they would need a fork in order to eat it. Ultimately, at least in my experience, the eating part is the nicest. So building an app is relatively similar. I mean, if you're an app, you're going to need something. If you're building an app, you're going to need some ingredients like the libraries, the modules, the jar files, the gems. You're going to have some source code. You're going to have a bunch of dev tools that you need, like CLIs, version control systems, like GitLab, for example. You're going to have a bunch of build tools, and ultimately, you're going to have a runtime, like Kubernetes. So, first question, let's imagine that you're going to be a pastry chef. So imagine that you're standing in your favorite restaurant, and you're the pastry chef. You're about to create the ultimate dessert. Obviously, I hope that's cheesecake, but if it's not, that's okay too. Will subpar ingredients get you the best cheesecake ever? Exactly, thank you. So that is not going to happen. So you're going to need high-quality ingredients. High quality, high trust, because you also want to know where it's coming from. And that is the other thing. Where do the vendors that I use, the people that I go to buy my ingredients, where do they get their ingredients from? So having some form of traceability from the origin all the way to when it ends up in my kitchen and ultimately into my cheesecake, where is everything coming from? And the thing is that if you look at it, there are 3 things that matter very much for ingredients. So you want to have end-to-end transparency where things are coming from. You want to have traceability, making sure that you know who your vendor is, and you want to know who that vendor's vendor is, and so on, all the way up to wherever it's going to come from. And trust. Trust is incredibly important. And we'll touch on trust a few more times during this presentation as well. So, as an app dev, where do my ingredients come from? I mean, there are a bunch of programming languages here. And where are they going to come from? If I'm a Go developer, then I'm going to get my ingredients from something like Go Center, or maybe if it's on a private repository, something like GitLab or GitHub, in order to make sure that I get my source code from somewhere that I trust. I mean, if I do JavaScript, then I obviously get them from npm.js or somewhere else. If I do Python, then from PyPy. Did I miss any very important languages here? Just to make sure. Good. So in this case, it's still very important, where do I get my ingredients from? And I care about traceability in this case because I have to identify what is in that package. I mean, if I'm a chef, and hopefully not, I pick up like an ingredient box from Whole Foods or whatever, read the ingredients, then I want to know what is in that package. I need to know what is in that package as a chef. And the same thing as an app developer, I kind of need to know what is in there. Because ultimately, when I use it in production, someone is going to trust me with doing the right thing. I probably want to know who else is using it. If I'm the only person using a certain library, certain project, then that may or may not say something about the quality of their project. And obviously, I want to identify where it's stored. If it's somewhere on GitHub, if it's somewhere indexed by a trusted source, it's going to say a lot more about the trustworthiness and the traceability of that library than when it comes from some obscure FTP site. I obviously hope that no one downloads their libraries from an obscure FTP site. That would be really bad. So we'll do a quick poll, hands up. Are you using open source technology today? Good. That's good. So second question, do you have any influence over the open source tools that you're using today? Who is? Okay, I see a little. Okay. So it turns out, if you said yes to that second question, do you have some influence, then you're not alone. The vast majority, like 71% of developers, have some influence over what they use in production as terms of tools. So whether that is getting to choose their favorite editor, getting to choose what kind of library they're using, getting to choose what programming language or paradigm they're using. Those things are important to developers, including me, and we get to choose that, which is actually pretty awesome. That also means, looking at a bunch of other statistics, that 98% of developers use open source tools at work. And if I remember correctly who had their hands up, that was pretty much everyone here as well. 96% of all commercial apps, and the ones that we build at VMware are no different, use some form of open source tooling in there. And this to me was pretty amazing. 79% of all businesses, so the people that we work for at the end of the day, they use open source tools as a key component within their infrastructure. They use open source technology. They rely on some other developer to have created something that runs a key component within their business. And then my favorite question, who's here with a colleague today? Nice, okay. So, especially for those of you that are in the room with a colleague today, do you trust your colleagues? No, I heard someone say no, that's good. I mean, I obviously hope that the answer to that one is yes, I trust my colleagues. Okay, good, I see someone getting smacked. That's not entirely what I was hoping with that, but that's a good question, with source code. Okay, good. You know, that's obviously a bit of a joke because I honestly hope that everyone at least trusts their colleagues when it comes to building libraries, creating source code. But do you trust a developer that is maybe 1,000 miles away at the other end of the country, at the other end of the world, with making a key component for your application? Whether that is something that ultimately ends up in Kubernetes, whether that is something that ends up in Apache struts, whether that is something that ends up in a Go module. Are you trusting that developer? And the answer to that is, hopefully when it's something like Kubernetes, is yes, I'll trust that. If it's a very unknown project, maybe a bit less. And that is where trustworthiness comes in for libraries, for software dependencies as well. I mean, end-to-end transparency is, again, very important. Do you trust that? Do you know who that other developer is? Do you trust that developer? Can you trace back what that person did from the first commit that they did to update the dependency all the way to what you're running in production today? And that ultimately comes up to trust. Do you trust that person? Or do you trust that organization? So I think it's safe to say that having trust in where your ingredients are going to come from is both important in making cheesecake as well as in building apps. Everyone agrees? Good. Otherwise, we're going to have a very, very annoying rest of the conversation. Letting you know. So second thing, let's talk about recipes a bit. And recipes, at least for chefs, are obviously all about their trade secrets. I mean, that is how they make their special dish. That is how a 2-star Michelin restaurant makes their noodles. That is how McDonald's make the sauce for their Big Mac, assuming that still nobody knows how that's actually done. And the interesting thing, and I'm pretty sure that you cannot read this, at least not yet, because I'll make the slides available, is that a lot of recipes get stolen. So the way that we protect our recipes within the software industry is obviously using good. Who said licensing? That is exactly right. Yes. The other two were correct as well, by the way. Obviously, licenses. And if you get your project somewhere from an open place, that is all about open source licenses. And I took a screenshot. I know it's unreadable, so you'll have to trust what trust. Nice. What I have there on the slide, that on this page you have 35 different licenses. 13 of them require you to publish the sources that you create when you use that component. More interestingly, 4 of them allow your users to ask for your source code if you're running that as a hosted version. Can you imagine that if Google, for example, used that in Gmail, we would all be able, assuming you use Gmail, we would all be able to get the source code. We would be able to allow to ask the source code of Gmail. Wouldn't that be awesome? Assuming you want to run your own. Recipes in software is obviously about which one do you need, and it turns out that if you shift left, and I know that is a total marketing term, but if you shift left what you do about security, then you're 11 times faster to fix whatever problem is caused by security issues than if you do not. If you let things go into production, it's going to take 11 times longer than if you would have found out at like where you commit. So things like, so security is your friend. I mean, seriously, there are developers out there that are like the true sentries of a product. I mean, they know every single letter of source code that's been written, every single bit and byte that goes into production. Those people, you all here in the audience, you are the true sentries of your product, making sure that you have safe source code. So when you think about recipes in software, common faults, obviously input validation, making sure that a number is actually a number, not a string, memory corruption, things like numeric errors, probably one of my favorites, because I obviously always fail to check that, and cryptographic issues. If you encrypt stuff and you decrypt stuff, are you sure that that's exactly the same? But what about things like hard-coded passwords? Who has ever committed something to GitHub with a hard-coded password or API key in there? And I'll be honest, I did it too. Right? So that is tough. Those are things that we need to watch for. I mean, missing validations, backdoors, whether or not you created that purposefully or not, and things like data anomalies. Are we sure that if we expect that a name is being sent in, that it's actually a name? So those are things that are incredibly important when you think about your recipes in software. Recipe in software is nothing more than the steps that your compiler needs to take, that your user needs to take to get from A to B. The same that your chef is going to create a cheesecake from A to Z. So dependencies, at least in my view, coming from companies that have dealt with that, they need to be immutable. Because the best way to guarantee issues in your source code is to do a git push -f, and force push into Git. By the way, if you've ever done that, please don't. I kind of want to make sure that libraries, if we use them, that they are kept safe, including the rest of your recipes as well. Any Node.js developers in the room here? No? Okay, nice. So a few years ago, there was this issue with a library called leftpad, 6 lines of JavaScript code that disappeared from the internet and caused havoc to like millions of builds. Millions of products could no longer be built because six lines of JavaScript code were gone. Obviously, it took them some time to fix that, and that's a problem. And obviously, do you trust your suppliers enough? And it comes back to trust again, making sure that you know where your stuff is coming from. So I guess it's also safe to say that for both making cheesecake and making apps, that recipes are critical. So don't lose them. Please don't delete them from the internet if you publish them for other people to use. And also make sure that if you publish them somewhere that people can validate that it comes from you. So next up, let's talk about tools. I mean, a chef is going to have their favorite set of pots and pans. They're going to have their favorite kitchen equipment. As a developer, you're going to have your favorite source code editor. You're going to have your favorite source control system. So to me, picking a source control system is somewhat like my wife or a chef out there picking her or his favorite set of knives. The thing is, if you're hoping that I'm going to tell you what the best one is, I'm not going to do that. Simply because I don't know all of your use cases. And I think that every developer, and this goes back to one of the slides I talked about earlier, where 71% of developers gets to choose what tools their company uses. I hope that everyone is able to choose the tool that they use, that they can choose what fits best for their particular use case. If that's a $1,000 set of knives, super awesome. If it's not, also super awesome. So choosing the right equipment, who here has kids? Who of those kids has that super cute little kitchen over there, right? Or had, yes. I mean, if you're going to make a super awesome cheesecake, is that the kitchen and the kitchen equipment you're going to choose? Probably not. Sorry? Okay, you know what? That's fair. Yes, okay, I like that. According to his daughter, that is absolutely the kitchen equipment that you're going to use. You're right. More likely, though, a chef is going to end up with something like that. And the whole idea here is that you're going to have enough working space to put out all your ingredients, to make sure that you have a set process, and within the space of a chef, that's called the mise en place, making sure everything is in the right place, making sure that the process is ready to be completed with the least minimal additional steps. So that means that you can always, from A to Z, every single time, that you can follow the same process. So if I look here at my super awesome dual monitor setup, it's kind of nice, right? Good. That means that I can follow the exact same process, and we call that continuous integration and continuous delivery. Thank you. Yes, exactly. CI/CD. So where in CI/CD, and if I press the next button, you'll obviously see it. Where in CI/CD should we place our security scans? Where do we put our component analysis? Where do we put our static code analysis? Where do we put our runtime security? CI, okay, yes. Pre-commit, yes, love it. Anyone else? Anyone on this side? Okay, So we obviously want to put that as far left as possible. So ideally, and I absolutely agree with you, we want to put that here in code, or at least in the commit section. And the nice thing about, as I talked a bit about what we did with, what we do with Cloud Journey, is we talked about a process called continuous verification, where it all comes down to how optimized can I make sure that my code is going to production. So making sure that my source code is safe, using a bunch of checks, using open source tools, by the way, that the performance is going to be okay. Because if I translate that back to a chef, then I want to make sure that my fridge is correctly on the correct temperature, that my oven is on the correct temperature. And cost, because at the end of the day, my company wants to know what we're spending in production, what we're going to spend in production. If I'm a chef, the owner of the restaurant, or me if I am that owner, I want to know what I'm spending to make that cheesecake. So those are things that are incredibly important. And with the Cloud Journey team, my team made an amazing demo using a bunch of open source tools, Claire, GitLab, who are here as well, deploying that to a Kubernetes cluster. And we wrote a bunch of blogs about what we call continuous verification. So if you go to cloudjourney.io, you'll find a bunch of things that we've written about how we do that. Again, using a bunch of open source tools, so it's free. Again, I'm not here to sell you software. That was a good thing, right? Good. So there are a few do's and don'ts that I think are important for DevOps. And I came to that after talking to a bunch of awesome developers, you all in the room here, and a bunch of companies that I've worked with and worked for. So one, treat your DevOps as code. I mean, the whole idea that we have infrastructure as code is incredibly important. Automate your process as much as possible, and that obviously means that if you turn it into code, you're going to be able to test it. You're going to be able to make sure that it has the least errors possible. Standardize and automate your security and governance processes. Because if you standardize and you automate, you make sure that you have the least amount of errors. And if you standardize, you can repeat it. Get some insights into what you're doing as an end-to-end process. I mean, draw it out on a wall. Use some software to map it out. But have an idea of how and what you're deploying and why you're deploying it. So that comes back to like the 3 Ps of DefSec Ops. I obviously also have a bunch of don'ts. Don't have developers write and maintain the scripts for DevOps. And what I mean with that is don't have them do that as their day job. It shouldn't be their task to only and always write those scripts for every single release that you do. Because that comes back to the optimizing and automating. Have them write it once so that you can reuse it over and over for every deployment, ideally. So think about your current tools and your processes, and think about how magically they will work when you're moving everything to a container and when you're moving everything to the cloud. More likely than not, the answer is not magically going to work. So think about when you're doing that, what tools are going to help you. Some of those tools could be ours. Some of those tools will not be. Also, don't believe that a single vendor is going to be your answer to everything. I mean, as much as I would love to say that we at VMware have all the answers and all the software that you need, obviously that's true, but that's a different story. There are going to be other tools out there as well. So think about, and this comes back to being able to make the choice yourself. Make sure that you look at your use case and make sure that you pick the right tools for that use case. And also don't think that security is someone else's problem. I mean, when I started off asking with who really cares about security, I saw a few hands that didn't go up. And I think that as an industry, as developers, as ops, as DevOps people here in the room, we are all responsible for the production code that we put out as a company. Whether that is me writing a bunch of scripts, running some code that's ultimately going to live on something like AWS Lambda, or whether that's you writing some code that's going to live somewhere else, we are responsible for what we do in our community. Also, don't think that a firewall is like the only thing you're ever going to need in terms of security, because it's relatively easy to hack through a firewall nowadays. So now that we're ready to eat our cheesecake, so I hope we have some cheesecake ready. No, I'm kidding.
You weren't making it here?
Yeah, I thought about doing that. I thought about making cheesecake here as well, but it turns out I'm a very terrible baker. So I would have had to fly my wife out here, and I could have done that. You're right.
I mean, this is sense.
That's fair. I'll talk to my manager about it. That's also true. It takes slightly longer. But let me share some final thoughts. So make sure that your ingredients come from a safe place. Make sure that they come from trusted vendors. And when I say trusted vendors, that doesn't mean that it has to be a paid component. I mean, that absolutely can be open source, as long as you can check that it's safe. Whether using some static source code analysis tools, whether that is because you absolutely know that developer, just make sure that you keep it safe, that they keep it safe. Make sure that you keep your recipe safe. I mean, if you were the author of LeftPad, please don't delete it again. If you are the author of some other open source tool that someone else is using, just keep it out there. I mean, there are people depending on your library. Again, choose the right tools for the job. I totally realize that not everyone is going to need a $1,000 a set of chef knives. I mean, I don't have that. My wife doesn't either, for that matter. She would love to, though. Plan, definitely, yes. So make sure that you choose the right tools for the job. And the only person that can answer what are the right tools for my job is going to be you yourself. So do some research, do some POCs. Most tools have POCs available or free trials. Make sure that you're able to choose whatever it is that you feel comfortable with. And make sure that you have a transparent process. Because at the end of the day, when you leave your company or when you're on vacation or when you're out sick, then someone else has to be able to go in, see what you did, why you did it, and how to replicate it. So if you want to have some more information, then obviously go to cloudjourney.io. Follow us at cloudjourney.io, because I'll make sure that we tweet out the link to these slides. So if you want to take a picture of the slides, this would be the one to do, because it has all the URLs on there. If you want to follow me when I talk about cheesecake or apps, then I am at Leon Stichter on the internet. And with that, I totally appreciate everyone for coming. Thank you, and enjoy the conference. If we have time for questions, we can totally do that.
Is there any questions?
Any questions, anybody? Nope. All right.
I guess I wasn't that clear. I know, right? I mean, the only thing that could have been better is if I actually had cheesecake here. I'll take that as feedback. So.
Actually, here's the question. So are the chill in the refrigerator cheesecakes real cheesecakes?
I would say no. But, I mean, I would eat them. I'm not going to lie to you. I would totally eat them. But they would not be the cheesecake, or I wouldn't necessarily call them cheesecakes.
Any other questions? Okay.
Thank you.
So thank you, Leon. Appreciate it. We're going to let Dave get set up. Are we going to start? Okay. So if you want to get something to drink, feel free to do that. We're get started at what, 10 minutes? Use the restroom?
No, no, this is my first time in this whole lovely state of yours. As you're probably aware. I'm based out of the New York office. I live across the river in Jersey. Short North?
Yeah, yeah.
And I was like, ooh, I like this neighborhood.
Test, test. Test. Test, test. Check, 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 check. I feel like I'm gonna talk to my, I don't want to talk to my chair. Maybe I should move it down a little. Right here in the middle of the cloud. Check, 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 check. I don't know. Hopefully they can, the audio people can make it work. I could switch to the handheld if I need to. Okay, then I should probably turn it off again.
Everything interfaces. So once it gets to system test and above, we are managing those environments.
So when you say manage those environments, you mean persistent environments or like ephemeral that you manage the process for?
We're trying to
Are you managing that through manual process or automated?
automate. And then we have an offshore team that runs the flows and everything. So it's not.
Have you done a talk about that? You should do a talk about that. I was talking to someone after my morning presentation. Well, do you have some case studies for people who've done these kinds of installations? I don't really want to read a library. Stories like yours are really powerful, especially for people who are going to advocate inside their company. You know, if you give a book and a PDF, whatever, they're going to say, look what Nationwide did. They're going to outcompete us if we don't do this too.
Oh, we're about a minute. Okay, so let's get started. So for our 2:15 slot, we have Dave Stanke. Am I saying it right? Yep. Cool. He is going to talk to us about continuing.
Hello, hello again. If you've spent a lot of time in this room over the last couple of days, you've seen a lot of me, and you're probably asking, who the hell does this guy think he is? Well, yesterday I thought I was a product manager, and this morning I thought I was Nathan Harvey, but right now I think I'm Dave Stanke, DevOps guy, and I'm going to speak to you about integration testing and continuous integration and jamming those things together into continuous integration testing. We'll start with some general principles, and then we'll get into a detailed example around a Kubernetes microservice application, etc. buzzwords. So we hear this word continuous a lot in this industry. Continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous validation, continuous improvement, and continuous is awesome. I'm here to say yay on continuous. When we take these discrete heavyweight batch processes and move them into continuous small batch processes, we get good things. So first of all, we get that classic lean manufacturing benefit of small batch sizes, our increased throughput, less waste, less work in process. Secondly, we get faster throughput and more uptime, as we've seen from Soder. And thirdly, it's good for people. Because think about that 48-hour deploy that starts at Friday midnight. It's not really all that fun, right? If we start acting like these important, essential processes we do are actually like kind of like our day job, it actually makes for less burnout and more happy people. Now, the original continuous thing is continuous integration. And this goes back, it comes out of a bad experience that people used to have. It used to be
that a software team would be a lot of individual people, all separately working on their code in their little offices. Now, for young people, an office is this little room with walls. I don't know. So they would all be working independently, and then after some period, it could be weeks, months, they would all put their code all together, and they would do the merge. The merge. The merge was when you jammed all your code together. And when you take a bunch of code that hasn't been living together, and you put it all together at the same time, you get conflicts. And so this is because while all of these people are working independently, no one has been paying attention to whether this code works together. And so putting together, you get merge conflicts. And teams would spend weeks, even months, resolving the merge conflicts one by one, picking which one should win. Now, that made for really bad software delivery schedules and also really unfun situations. So we invented continuous integration. Now, continuous integration means that you merge the software together in small increments all along the way. And conflicts can be dealt with when they're still small and cuddly and manageable. Now, it's totally possible to have continuous integration and still have really bad software. Like, imagine if you resolve your merge conflicts by just randomly picking which one wins. You'll have really great throughput. You'll have really bad software. So in practice, continuous integration also means testing. We test the software that we're merging as we're merging it, or before we're merging it, or shortly thereafter. And all along the way throughout the software development lifecycle, we generally up the intensity of our testing so that by the time we actually ship it, it is fully approved and ready to go. Why do all this testing? Why do we need fast feedback cycles all along the way of our development? Because Toyota does it. Seriously, now, how many people here have an organization that is as successful as Toyota and been successful for as long as Toyota? Not bad, not bad. Most of the rest of us, let's just cargo code what they did. But we do it for a reason, which is the reason that Toyota does it, which is that just like a Corolla, software gets more complicated as it moves. And this means that fixing bugs becomes harder and harder as it moves through the process. A lot of folks here are probably familiar with the research that's been done by NIST and IBM that shows the cost of fixing a bug that you found in production, show this on my right, production is many times higher than the cost of fixing a bug found in dev. Different studies have found different numbers. I've seen 6x, I've seen 30x, I've seen 100x. Regardless of what the x's is, it's a lot of x's. There's more data here. So the State of DevOps report, which everyone by now has downloaded and read, shows that continuous integration, or continuous testing, as they call it, I like that term better, in fact, is something that is indicative or predictive of continuous delivery, and continuous delivery predicts higher software delivery performance and higher availability. So this results in better business outcomes like higher profitability. So testing is good for business. And what are we testing? Well, here's what we call the test pyramid. At the bottom, we have a bunch of unit tests, and these are small, fast tests that we can run a lot, and they run alongside our code, and they run really quickly. And then above that, we have integration tests, where we take multiple components and make sure that they operate well together. And finally, at the top, we have a small number of end-to-end tests, where we exercise a full user journey across multiple steps and exercise multiple aspects of the code. Now, what we're seeing here, I want to mention, in the context of this talk, what we're going to do is say that tests that run within or at one microservice level are unit tests. And when we put them together, multiple services interacting, that's where we get integration tests. Now, this is an idealized test pyramid. Here's a real test pyramid. What we usually see is we've got a handful of unit tests, we have 0 integration tests, and at the top, 1 or 2 really clunky, broken end-to-end tests that everyone just ignores because they're always read anyway. No judgment. This is hard. Integration tests are hard. Why? Well, first of all, your production runtime is not the same thing that you're writing code on, probably. It's unlikely that you can take an exact copy of your entire production runtime and jam it onto your laptop. If you can, either you don't have a lot of users yet, or you have one hell of a laptop. Cost. You don't want to spend more on running your integration test than you're going to get from shipping that software to users. Speed. The more stuff that you exercise in your tests, the slower they're going to be, and that's unfun. And side effects. It's really hard as you get more and more complexity in what you're testing to keep all of the effects jammed into that safe testing place. As you start doing more production-like testing, you probably are going to start dealing with state, which means tests to manipulate state. And then when you're done, you often have to unmanipulate the state. The stuff is hard. Microservices make it harder. Now, we all love microservices, and I'm not here to throw shade on any microservices. We have reached the end of the viability of the monolith. And microservices let us split up our monolith into independent pathways so that we can have independent teams working separately and moving and iterating separately. With microservice, we're deliberately creating space within the code base so that light can shine in. And you have better velocity and better ability to push new features to prod. But I'm hearing something in this world that makes me kind of concerned. And that's that microservices teams are not only developing in isolation, they're testing in isolation. This is what I hear a lot. Each team is going to test their code, and they're going to test it real good. And then, through the power of microservice, they're going to independently deploy to prod. And so the first time that these bits of code start interacting with each other is when they land in production infrastructure. Doesn't this kind of look like that big, nasty merge situation we looked at before? So the difference here is instead of in some UAT environment, a lot of times these things are landing together in prod where users are. Okay, so this is hard. Why bother? Do we have to? Let's look at the failure case. First of all, semantic versioning is one way that we use with microservices to ensure that things are working together. And this is good. Semantic versioning is it's a contract, it's a promise. And it says that I'm going to advertise my intent of the change of my API so that your team can plan accordingly. And it's great to make that promise, but promises are meant to be broken. I can promise you backwards compatibility all day, but unless you test it, there's really no guarantee that it's going to work. Secondly, complex systems have emergent properties. These individual critters might all be perfectly well behaved, but when they all jump in the pool together, it gets crazy. With complex systems, 2 plus 2 can easily equal OOM. Most important, because users experience an application. Your users don't give a hoot about your separation of concerns. If you've got a system with 20 microservices and 19 of them are all playing really nicely together and one of them is acting cranky, you don't have an application that's 95% working. You have an application that's 100% busted. Now here's a hot idea these days, testing in prod. So this is an idea that comes out of the observability movement. And it says that we should treat production systems as fundamentally unknowable and unpredictable. It says that we should put our code up into prod and then go test it and see, did it work? And if it doesn't work, we should roll it back real quick. What do folks here think? Should we stick our stuff up into prod and then say, did that work okay? Yes, we should. And the reason is because prod is fundamentally unpredictable. There's only one prod. Prod's where the users are, and not prod is where the users aren't. So yes, we should be prepared to observe our code in prod. Yes, we should be prepared to reconcile it really quickly. But let's be clear about what testing in prod is. This isn't a cowboy approach with a YOLO, throw it up and see what happens. Testing in prod is a disciplined approach to software development that involves hypotheses, tools for measurement, and testing. And it doesn't mean, part of what testing in prod recognize is that we can't pretend that we can solve all problems before we ship the software. But we can still pretend that we can solve some of them. And what we need to do is make a considerate approach to how we're going to do that. It's about risk. We need to ask, what are the ramifications of a bad software release? So Let's say you're working on a website that makes meme GIFs. Meme, M-E-M-E, not M-E-A-N, though often it's yes on that. So you're making meme GIFs, right? And let's say there's a problem with a request. The meme looks funny. Okay, what's the worst that can happen? User clicks retry. Heck, they might click retry a couple times. It's not working. Oh no, that person has lost some internet points and they've wandered off. Life goes on. What if you're working on an e-commerce site? It's possible that you might take someone's money and not give them anything for it. I've done that. I've done that to a lot of people. And that becomes pretty unfun. You end up having customer support calls, you have bad reviews on Yelp, you might have chargebacks, which cost the company a lot of money. It just ends up having an actual tangible business impact. Now, what if your software runs the power grid for a hospital? We might want to think a little bit harder about how casually we treat our software quality. We need to make informed risk analyses and have that dictate how much software testing we do, when we do it, how deeply we do it. Now, this talk isn't about creating a framework for risk analysis. I wish it were. I wish I knew how to do that. In my experience, our risk analysis has typically been, crap, something real bad happened. Let's try and not have that happen again. We were lucky to survive. If anyone has any thoughts on how to create a real risk algorithm around software testing, I would love to hear it. In the meantime, let's talk about how to do the testing that we've decided we need. So, big part of testing is provisioning, creating a system under test. And that's going to be a place where your application can run. Remember, that's application, not microservice. And then we're going to run our test against that isolated environment. And so I'm going to show you some different ways to do that provisioning with some different pros and cons. What are we optimizing for when we're trying to create that system under test? We're optimizing for the big 6. Let's take a look. First of all, fidelity. How close to prod is this environment that we're creating? We want it to be as close as possible to give us the most predictive value. But then, the more and more it's like prod, probably the more it costs and the harder it is to spin up. So there's a balance to be struck there in terms of fidelity. Isolation. We want to make sure that the test can run on its own. Has anyone had the experience of you're running a test, it's going along, and then all of a sudden, what the heck happened? So you shout across the room, yo, what's going on with staging? And someone shouts back, oh yeah, I dropped the database because I wanted to see how long it would take to restore. And you're like, so now I got to start my test all over again. Ideally, we would like our test environment to be dedicated to our tests and to stay consistent throughout the entire test. Also, preferably, we shouldn't be invoking external resources like production infra or even sometimes testing infra, because even if you're only doing reads, it's possible to totally brick a service by DDoSing it with a bunch of reads or sending some malformed request. I've done it. Speed, because of course, fast is better than slow. Dora tells us that the time from commit to prod is an essential predictor of DevOps success. So we want fast testing infrastructure. And after we've got speed, we want more speed. Because no matter how fast you can make an individual test run, if you've got a lot of people on your team, you're probably going to want to have more than one commit being able to be tested at the same time. If you've ever been sitting watching a long-running test, well, that's really annoying, right? But now think about if you're sitting watching someone else's long-running test and you're stuck in the queue. That's infuriating. So we want to be able to scale and have parallel testing. Ephemerality. So this means that how long does the test infrastructure last? Ideally, we want it to last as long as we need it and no more. So that would mean as soon as the test is over, it should disappear. Maybe. Because if it passes, we got our green check mark, great, off it goes. But if it didn't pass, we might want to go into that infrastructure and poke around in it to see what went wrong. So sometimes on a failed test, we want our test infrastructure to hang out for a while. How long? Now that's hard to say. We want it to hang out long enough until we're like, I probably won't go in there and look at that, it's old news. I tend to think in terms of hours, it could easily be in terms of days, probably not months, because by then it's no longer relevant. And finally, cost, because of course. We want to constrain our costs on testing, first of all, because we don't want to spend more on testing than it's really worth. Also, ideally, we can recognize the value of our test infrastructure, which means it's really great to have some of that cloud-like elasticity so that our test costs are aligned with how much we're producing in terms of code. So I'm going to show you this microservices example. Now, this is an application that has 2 microservices. But we all know the only numbers are 0, 1, and infinity. So this is an application with infinite microservices. It's a cookie store, and it has 2 layers. Each of these layers can be spun up and tested individually. But if you spin up that web layer without the database, what you have is an empty storefront with no inventory, no cookies. If you spin up the database without the front end, what you're going to have is a bunch of inventory, but you can only talk to it through SQL queries. Now, people in this room might really like ordering their Christmas gifts over SQL, but you're probably not going to get a ton of customers. And we really want to give cookies to everyone. Take that, GDPR. So let's look at how we can test both of these services together in an integration test environment. If you want to play along at home, you will find the repo here at this URL, along with test configurations for both Google Cloud Build, I work on this product, I should know its name, Google Cloud Build, and Jenkins. So what we're going to do is we're going to show you multiple ways to run through this kind of integration test, and they all use the same basic flow. First thing we do is we build 2 containers, a web container and a DB container. Then we provision a test infrastructure. We put our web and DB services into it, and then we're going to run an integration test. And this is a simple test that just greps the front end and looks for a particular string. In this case, it looks for the string chocolate chip. Happens to be the best cookie. There will be no argument about that. If it passes, we're going to deprovision that infrastructure. And if it fails, it's going to hang around, depending on the mechanism that we use, so that it can be debugged. So here are 4 ways that we can run through this application. The first uses Docker Compose. Any folks here ever use Docker Compose? Yes. I usually get a fair number of hands on that. Docker Compose is a great lightweight way of stitching together Docker containers. Developers like it because it runs in the same Docker environment that they've been probably using and has a simple configuration file to stitch these things together. In this context, what's going to happen is this entire build machinery is going to run within a single VM instance. And that means it's very fast. And it also, at the end of the run, the entire thing is deprovisioned. So you never pay for any orphaned resources. Downsides of using a technique like this is Docker Compose is not Kubernetes. You're not going to run your production infra on Docker Compose, probably. I've seen it done. It's kind of not recommended. So you're going to have 2 different configuration files, and that can drift. And also, you have the challenge of educating people about maintaining multiple things, kind of heavy. And the other problem here is that ephemerality issue. So it's great that we would never pay for an orphaned resource. The hard part is that we can't go in and debug against it because at the end of the build, it's gone. So let's try something that can maintain through an external resource. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to deploy against an actual Kubernetes cluster. And this gives us really great fidelity. We're talking about real Kubernetes, just like our actual application runs on, because everyone's application's on Kubernetes now, right? Like I said, this is an example just about Kubernetes. The same techniques apply no matter what. So in this case, what we're going to do, we're going to do our build, and then we're going to create a namespace within our shared cluster, deploy our services into it, run the test, and at the end, we destroy the namespace. And one nice thing about Kubernetes namespaces is if you destroy the namespace, everything in it disappears. Modulo, I just learned this afternoon, certain persistent volume mounts. We're going to gloss over that. So the benefit of this is that it's really fast, and you have really good isolation, because by default, items within a namespace won't reach out and talk to each other. So it's like its own little world inside the cluster. Really good fidelity, especially if you're running your production cluster in the same way as your Kubernetes cluster. I'm, of course, using Google Kubernetes Engine. And cost is relatively constrained, especially if you use like an auto-scaling. This staging cluster is going to scale up and down according to your need. Downside here is we don't have perfect isolation in the sense that these namespaces do live all in the same Kubernetes cluster. It means there's possibility for them to stomp on each other. Also, you can't test anything cluster-wide. So if you're doing something like a Kubernetes custom resource definition or CRD, or say you wanted to test your software against different versions of Kubernetes, this isn't going to work for that. Yeah. All right. So what if we wanted really great, oh, that's what I wanted to mention on this one, is that you also have that problem that at the end, your namespaces could hang around. You could have a lot of namespaces as orphaned if you have a lot of failed tests and you never go in and clean them up. So if we wanted something that would clean itself up, we can use a self-destructing VM. What? Okay, self-destructing VM is a VM that destroys itself. And now this is useful because a VM costs money, even if no one's using it. And if you spin up a VM for every single test, you're going to end up potentially spending a lot of money on orphaned resources. So this is a technique that lets you make VMs that will turn themselves off. And the way that works is when it starts up, we set a timer. I used to usually set mine for about 2 hours or 4 hours. At the end of that timer, the VM is going to make an API call. Make an API call out to the cloud API, and it's going to say, hey, I want you to delete instance XYZ. And XYZ is my name. So then the cloud comes back in, and poof, I'm gone. If you're interested in playing with your own self-destructing VMs, you can grab a bit.ly link here. We're going to use that self-destructing VM to spin up a Kubernetes environment. Now, this is just one little VM, and we want it to be kind of fast. We don't really want to deal with it in full Kubernetes. So what I'm going to use in this case is something called K3S. There's other versions of this called MicroK8s, Minikube, I think there's a couple others. These are Kubernetes compliant runtimes that can fit onto one node. And what they do is they eschew some of the older APIs, some of the more advanced technology, advanced features. They don't scale the same way, but they're great for CI because you get a proper Kubernetes API interface in a single VM, and it spins up fast. So in this case, we're going to provision that VM, deploy to it. Now we have an isolated Kubernetes instance where we can manipulate the entire instance, like do CRDs and stuff, run our tests against it, and then if it worked correctly, we're going to deprovision it. If it didn't work correctly, we can go in and debug it. If we forgot to debug it, it's going to destroy itself. But what if we wanted to go all the way? Perfect isolation, perfect fidelity. Could we create a Kubernetes cluster for every single test? Yes, we could. I was surprised to find out how workable this was. So you can do this routine where in every test, you spin up a Kubernetes cluster. This requires, I think, something like a Kubernetes engine, though I suppose you could script it yourself with Terraform. In fact, that should work just fine. You can spin up a Kubernetes cluster, run your stuff against it, and then destroy that entire Kubernetes cluster. This is not that much slower than running against the VM or against the namespace per test option. But it is, of course, a little slower, and it's going to cost more, and you're going to have that orphaned resource, which is going to be even more expensive than an orphaned VM. So comparing all of these techniques, you can see there's a lot of different ways to create a Kubernetes or other sophisticated runtime to use as part of your tests. They all have pros and cons and trade-offs. There's really no single best answer, except there is a single best answer. Most cases, I believe, the best answer for this use case is going to be that shared staging Kubernetes. The namespace isolation is really pretty darn good, and in most cases, it's going to act as that each test is in a fully isolated environment. With that auto-scaling, you're going to have really great cost constraints. This is the fastest of the choices, modulo Docker Compose, because it's got the infrastructure is already provisioned. And while most of the time I would really be loath to say everyone should share one big instance, again, the isolation is really good. And if you ever have a problem, of course, further down the line, you could do something with even higher fidelity, like spinning up a whole Kubernetes cluster. I was in an open space, I think it was yesterday, and someone described exactly this technique. Sounded like they were happy with it. So, Dave, this is cool and all, but what if I have lots of services, like actually infinity, or maybe dozens, hundreds? It could get really slow to spin up all my stuff. And the answer is yes. And so you may be that you want to take some of your services and mock them out or stub them out, or have a long-standing service running as a test endpoint, perhaps for stuff that doesn't change as much, and you're less worried about getting the freshest version in every single test run. Dave, what about state? Everything's got state. The database is the hard part. In my example, I showed you running a database inside a container as part of the test. but you're probably not running your database inside Kubernetes. So options here include you could use something like a database as a service and spin up a database externally and then turn it down. Or you could have a standing database. That can be tricky where people stomp on each other or schemas need to change, but it's also going to be a good compromise. A big challenge here is about database size, where if you want to have a really good test, you actually want a database that's of the size of your production data. That's going to take forever to spin that up and spin it down as part of each test. So more likely, you're going to want to have a test data set that's smaller. Maybe towards the end of your test, you do something where you have a true 10 terabyte database that you're testing against. But Dave, what about PII? Now, this is a tricky one. The highest fidelity test is going to be one where you run against an exact replica of the production data with all the user stuff in it. Probably a no-no in most industries. Is that okay in insurance? Is it cool? No, not so much. Not so cool. This one's a hard one. A really high fidelity practice would be to do something where you export data out of your production database, run a sanitization script on it, and then import that into a staging or test environment. And you could even script that so that happens regularly. But that's kind of hard. And you're going to have to ask yourself, is it worth it? And really, that's the kind of question I want us to be asking with integration testing. Not, do I have to? But what's worth it for me? I know I can do it. I know there are pros and cons. I'm going to figure out what's my sweet spot. Should I fire everything up into prod and just hope that it works on a wing and a prayer, deploy it all and let the users figure it out? Or should I take my time and test every last little bit over and over again until I'm completely sure that it's perfect before I let it out into the wild? The right answer is probably somewhere in between. And we each have to find our appropriate balance. When you figure out yours, I'd love to hear about it. So please tweet at me or chat with me. And that's my time. Thank you. And I'm going to make a suggestion. You can overrule me or the organizers. But I suggest rather than doing a group questions and answer, we let people take the break earlier. And if anyone wants to talk, just come on up to the stage and we'll chat. Sounds good. All right. So thank you for coming. If you're interested, I will be right there and we can talk about testing. Thank you.
So I do want to thank Dave because he did help us out over the last couple of days. We did have a speaker have a family emergency, and so he's been helping us, so we do appreciate everything he's done. So we had cheesecake, we had cookies, break is at 3. What with Leon was cheesecake, Dave was cookies. I have no clue, I didn't order it. So break will be at 3. It may already be there, but it's scheduled for 3. Be back in here at what, 3:15? Yes, it is. Just answer.
Close enough, yeah. All right, guys, we're going to get started here in a couple of minutes, so find your spots. Thanks.
I see a little silhouette of a man. I mean, if you're going to mic check.
You can't stop now.
This is not what you came here for.
So, Lego Man. Yes.
That was really creepy.
Really creepy.
Really creepy.
It happens when people are on stage looking like they're about ready to get going. That too? Maybe? All right. Oh, where was I? Name. Finally found it. So we've got Josh Atwell, Lego Man or whatever. I heard something about you like loving Legos or something. Anyways.
I do love Legos.
So speaking of Legos, how to be a failure. Oh wait, Legos are kind of awesome, so they're not a failure. Go for it.
Awesome. Thank you. Hi. How is everybody? My name is Josh Atwell, and I am a senior technology advocate for Splunk. And in my world, I talk about and talk with people about failure a lot. And I know what you're thinking. This guy's got to be great at a party. Because if
Totally rocked the Ignite Karaoke.
well, thank you. Yeah, I enjoyed the Ignite Karaoke. Those are fun. In the spirit of Ignite Karaoke, for today's talk, I actually changed the order of my slides. So, this is also an experiment of failure, okay? I think we're going to be fine, though. It's not going to be a problem, all right? But in all seriousness, I do talk to people a lot about failure. And it's part of the work that I do, but part of my desire for, as being a long-time IT operations professional who has dealt with the stresses and the toil associated with dealing with systems and complex systems that fail, I think it's really important that we improve the way that we talk about failure. All right, so quick little exercise, because I'm the type of person that likes to make people do things. Everybody close your eyes for a moment. Please don't go to sleep. Wait till halfway through my talk to fall asleep. All right, close your eyes. It's important that we have trust and safety. Raise your hand if you've ever felt like a failure. I'm the only one that sees. Okay? If you feel comfortable, keep your hands up just for a moment. If you feel comfortable with other people knowing that you've been a failure or felt like a failure, keep your hand up. If not, put your hand down. And now open your eyes. Okay? Two things. Number one, you are not alone. Okay? Everybody experiences this. Number two, for those of you who put your hand down, you're also not alone. Right? It takes a lot of courage to make that transition and to be open about that. It is hard to publicly talk about failure unless you're presenting on it. Right? So this is from Ross Clan. He was just actually talking about this 2 days ago at the Leadership Summit. Thank you, Ross, for helping with this transition in my talk. It is hard for people to talk publicly about failure. The way that we are measured as professionals is around eliminating or avoiding or eradicating failure. Right? We are already at a disadvantage in our ability to have a healthy attitude about failure. So let me tell you a story about an almost failure. Right? And I got to be candid, it is an almost failure. Early on in my career, or I guess halfway through my IT operations in the data center career, I was involved with a project where we had thousands of ESXi hosts that we had to apply a new certificate on. So we had to apply a new certificate for the virtual center server, and if you know virtualization at all, which I'm guessing about half of you do, when you do that, it breaks all trust communication with all of the hosts, right? And you have to apply that certificate to each host. Well, I'm not going to do that to thousands of systems by hand, so I wrote automation to do it, right? And for weeks, I prepped, I tested the systems to make sure I had the correct root password for the systems, right? You don't want to be surprised by those. and make sure that once I applied the certificate, I would be able to get it to automatically get reconnected to the virtual center server, right? There's no automatic refresh. You have to re-add it and put it in the right place. We kicked it off 9 in the morning. 7 different virtual center servers, 4 different data centers around the world, and we sat there and we waited. And we waited, and nothing was coming back up. No workloads were going down, but we couldn't manage anything at this point because Virtual Center Server was our management plane. I start to panic a little bit because we had tested it. We had validated that the process works. What is going on? There was one key difference between our testing and this moment, and that was when we were testing, we were using the Virtual Center client. When we were doing the actual work, we were using the web client because of the security certificate change. The web client simply wasn't refreshing, right? It was all working fine. We just didn't know that. But the way that we reacted, we were worried that we had really screwed things up and we were in for a really long weekend, all right? And the thing was, is like, I'm not a failure. You know, that was not a scenario that labeled me as a failure. I didn't really, take down the world. I just failed at recognizing what was going on and failed at doing something. Ermin Bobek, she's a humorist, a cartoonist, a humorist, and if you read about her life, it's very interesting. She stumbled a lot along the way before she became this prominent columnist and humorist. Now, when we fail, there's things that happen in our brains. We are chemical beings, right? We're very clever and industrious chemical beings, but we are chemical beings. When things go right and we have success, our body releases endorphins and dopamine and serotonin. And we get a euphoric sense, right? We're excited, we're happy, we're like, I want to do that again. Remember the time that you ride that roller coaster that you were really nervous about, but it's just thrilling? That's what your body's doing. It's releasing all of these chemicals, right? And you were encouraged to repeat that activity, okay? When we fail, however, our body releases cortisol. And what that does is it tells your body to, you get the flight or fight sensation. What it's really telling your body to do is, we're not thinking about any high-level stuff right now. We are just trying to protect ourselves because we feel threatened. And when we fail, we have that feeling. Those chemicals release through our body, and then we have that sensation, right? I think everyone that raised your hand, that moment of failure was probably very consistent in the way that you failed. And I've also identified in interviewing people, not scientific research, just in interviewing people about their scenarios when they failed and the response. Number one question that I ask people when I interview them is, what was that feeling that you had when you made that critical mistake, or you had that fear that you had failed, that you had erred in a way that was going to be impactful, right? Number one response was, I've let someone down. That's the concern. And it was consistent in every interview that I had. Like, no me leading them into this. Every single person said the exact same thing. I've let someone down. That is really powerful, right? And I think that's one of the reasons why when we fail and our discomfort in talking about failure is because it directly ties to the relationships that we have and our feeling of worth and value and how people depend on us. There was an interesting part in the second question, all right? So I'll ask, what was the response to by the people who you felt you were letting down by your mistake or your failure? Every single time they said, let's get this thing back online, let's figure out what happened, and let's learn from this. Let's try to avoid it happening again, but let's learn from it. In almost every scenario, every person I talked to, this was the response. So it's almost irrational for us to think that that failure is going to be so bad. There's reasons for that. We look at situations and we hear about situations of failure, right? We see it in movies, right? Everything's a disaster. The whole world's falling apart. We hear it in the news. Everything's failing. It's awful. It's bad, right? We're just inundated with this all the time. I love the story of Apollo 13. In Apollo 13, They have a failure on the spacecraft heading to the moon. 3 men on there who have no way of getting back safely with the information in the scenario that they're in, right? Gene Kranz was the flight mission director, right? He was in charge of the entire mission. And he made this statement, and it's become like a key statement in the history of NASA. He says, failure is not an option, which is a really interesting thing to say when you've just had a critical failure, right? But he wasn't talking about what broke. He was talking about how NASA, everyone at NASA, was going to respond to that to try to bring these men home alive, okay? Most of us are not dealing with a scenario where you have this level of stakes, okay? So the first thing is that when you fail, like, you're not likely dealing with the types of things where people's lives are at risk. And I know some of you do, and I have so much respect for you. I was never able to work in healthcare because I personally could not handle that responsibility. The other part of this is, like, we hear about it in literature, and we hear the war stories, right? We hear the war stories about these scenarios where people screw up and they're fired and their lives are ruined, and then they go homeless and then have problems. I mean, I'm exaggerating, right? But that's our deep fear, okay? And so there's this great book called Beyond Blame. I love this book. It's relatively short. I hope you all have an opportunity to read it. I'll give you the Blinkist version, right? A network admin makes just a routine, regular change, something he's done multiple times, but everything goes down. And this is a financial institution. This is a problem. Like, this means real money, significant monetary impact. Someone has to take the blame. Someone has to be the fall person. They have to be the responsible one, the root cause. We talk a lot about that, right? Turns out it was an unknown bug that had been delivered from the vendor that was on the networking gear, that when they executed that command, it broke. It had nothing to do with the person. The person was working well within the system and processes that they had, yet they were fired. And the book goes to explain why that's just wrong. You shouldn't function that way. It's not an appropriate way to function in an organization. But it does beg you to ask the question. When you're looking at when failures happen, you start asking these questions. You have to ask the question, is it the person or is it the system that you would want to blame, right? Is that the reason why it went down? Did the person do it or did the system allow it to happen? Or was it the system or was it the process that was used? You'll recall when AWS or S3 had that brownout, the administrator that was performing the maintenance task didn't do anything wrong. But what happened was the system allowed too many nodes to go into maintenance and go into rework, and the system failed. And the process failed because nobody was checking to see whether, what the constraint or the limitations and the criteria for the system were. So it was a holistic failure, enthusiasm. It is very, very, very difficult to maintain high enthusiasm in an industry where failure is so common and so poorly accepted. It's very difficult. We must, as engineers and developers and IT operations people, we must change the way that we communicate and the way that we work with one another around failure. We have to improve it, because if we lose the enthusiasm of everybody, we don't get to have events like this, and everybody's just really not enjoying working. Thomas Edison is a notable failure. If you know anything about his story with the light bulb, 10,000 times he found out how not to make a light bulb. That's a hell of a perspective around failure, right? But he's absolutely right. And he also makes the point that most people will give up right before they're about to succeed. And if you watch HBO's Ballers, Spencer Strassmore says, if you want to be endlessly motivated, failure is key. The way that we grow and become stronger professionals and stronger people, the way that we become stronger trees is through resistance and failure, right? It is how we get better. And we do have some fun with failure, right? Companies gotten really good with their 404s. You know, if I can get anything for you to take away and to take home from here, you know, make failure a positive force in your life, right? Become comfortable talking about failure. Make it safe to fail in the environments and the groups that you're within. Demonstrate that leadership, that failure is okay, it happens. Nobody's by themselves. Nobody's going to get their head cut off. I mean, not literally, but like figuratively, right? Everything's going to be fine. And help others when they fail. How you respond to other people when they fail. Okay? And most importantly, don't quit. Right? Don't let a failure stop you. Right? You know, like they said, you're just right around the corner. Interestingly enough, right outside of the door, right around the corner here, you commit to something and stay the course, anything's possible. Right? Success is a result of consistent failure and how you respond to that failure. So, how many of you, when you leave here today, are going to go out and fail? Thank you.
All right, we got a few minutes for questions if anybody's got any. Anybody?
Told you I'm great at parties.
Dude, you killed it again. All right.
All right, thank you again.
So everybody stick around if you're interested. Looks like we're going to have some T-shirts, maybe. Oh, after the retro. So you got to stick around for the retro.
We need to make them give us things before we give them more T-shirts, right? We need feedback, you get T-shirts.
What he just said. We need feedback. All right, so thank you all for coming out, especially for staying around. At the end of our events, it's pretty much traditional for us to do a conference retrospective. We want to hear from you. This is an opportunity to get some feedback from everyone. How did we do? What things could be done differently? What things did you not see that maybe we should consider doing? I don't know who is running this yet, but that's what we're going to be doing now. So, see, this is what happens. All right, so do we have something to record information? Maybe.
Maybe this great electronic device that I can type on.
Oh, your like 10-year-old laptop? Hey, mine's the 2012 like first Retina, and it still kind of works. By the way, if anyone's ever had to replace the battery in one of those laptops, it's not for the faint of heart. It actually might burst into flames. That's true, yeah. Yeah, so removing the battery to replace in a MacBook Retina involves
Let's not get into this right
acetone. I was waiting to see if he was actually ready to start taking information. Okay. Can someone grab the other mic, wherever? Oh, I should shut up now.
That's what I was telling you. Good job, Bill.
All right. So thanks, everyone. This is a great session, but can we have more like interactive, like hands-on type of the thing? Like yesterday, we have a Circus CI. Today was like alerting and monitoring on Kubernetes. That type of the sessions would be really helpful.
What I hear you're saying is that you enjoyed that we added in these additional hands-on things, and you would like to see even more next year.
That's correct.
I think we have the room for that. I think part of it is content, or getting people to actually run these. But yeah, that's excellent. And it being our first year, we wanted to see how well it was going to go, or not, but that's excellent feedback to add more.
Yeah, and that's exactly the feedback we kind of wanted from that because it was our first year. A couple questions. Was 50 per workshop enough, or were there people not able to get in them?
The rooms weren't even. One was 80 and one was, I don't know what the other one was, but the one I had was 80.
Wow.
So, and that's another thing is
okay then, because we already know.
Right sizing the rooms, because like Angels yesterday was just absolutely packed and standing room only. We forgot to add power and yeah.
So,
yeah.
like we already have some.
Okay, have someone back here. You ready?
I don't know what it was this year, but the open spaces felt kind of short. Like it wasn't because of the travel time in between rooms, and you have 30 minutes per session. But it felt like the conversations still wanted to go on, but we were already out of time, and you had to choose if you're going to leave 5 minutes early from your current session to make it to the start of the next, and maybe some staggered gaps to allow us to move between the rooms in between sessions might help a little bit. That might be an option too. And I don't know the quick and easy fix for this other problem, but I felt like a lot of the things I voted for all ended at the exact same time slot. Like the ones, and so I don't know what the fix is for that one as far as easy fixes, but it was a problem for me, and I'm sure other people had the same issue.
Here, come down.
So how I did it was the top votes just started at the first session, and I just went down the number of top votes. So unfortunately, like, that was how it worked out. I don't know if there's a better way to do that. We'll think about it, but
Maybe 1, 5, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Seed them. You can seed them.
Who else?
All right, anybody else? Raise your hand.
Something that might be good would be to get the guidebook out more than 2 days ahead of time so that people have the ability to make suggestions for the open spaces ahead of the beginning of the event, so that you could be voting already in the morning of the first day on what the afternoon's going to be.
When did we send the email?
I know I got it Monday morning.
Monday morning. Okay. So you would prefer to have it Friday?
Or last Monday.
Okay. Yeah. 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 Okay. Thank you.
So it was just an observation I made on the open spaces is several of the ones I attended only had sometimes like 4 or 5 people in them. I think that might have been an artifact of basically adding in the workshops. If there were a lot of people in workshops that I just remember in previous years going to open spaces that had 15 or 20 people in them, and this year it seemed like they were just much, much smaller.
Yeah, and that was one of our concerns about adding 2 additional things for people to do in that time slot. Some of them were packed, some of them weren't.
Here, hold up.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, you're good.
On the other hand, there was about 40 people in one of the rooms, so which was great.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that was caused that issue he just talked about.
Yeah, it's.
Yeah, and I can speak from personal experience, like
Here,
stacking
like
open
DB2
spaces
and AIX,
can
how
be
to
very
manage.
difficult. Anybody else raise your hand?
And actually, I also had an opportunity to participate in some of the open spaces yesterday, just with 3 or 4 people in them, and they actually came out a lot better than the one with 20 people because you were really able to have some heart-to-heart conversations as well. So I know for me, I love having that variance too. It is good to have those numbers. Several of us did go around counting heads every session just so that we could get that balance, so that we can help improve it next year as well.
Thank you.
There. This is my first Devopsdays, but I think that my only feedback would be the zero waste thing was awesome. So we should do it. The data seemed to be really encouraging, so not really, just keep on keeping on, right? So yeah, it was awesome. So thank you.
And that's a policy of the university. Like if anyone's been to a football game or something like that, they've been trying to do that for a number of years. So it's partly us picking the right venue who wants to implement that policy. We got one down here.
This is my first time also being at this conference, but what I also found really valuable is this young lady over here doing these illustrations, picking up all the key points from all the speakers. I found it fascinating, and also it was helpful for me because I was still not able to keep up with catching all my notes, but going back to this and taking the pictures and seeing that, really helped me at least. So, thank you.
I have a microphone here. It's my first time here too as well. I'm a InfoSec architect, so I for me, I just noticed that this is a DevOps, of course, but with my observation is based on the fact that security and development is always there's always a gap there between the misunderstanding in that point. Why don't you next time maybe incorporate more security topic in here in development and applications, stuff like that? That will probably help also developer understand the other side of the house. So sometimes we have that gap going on, and then I'm that kind of person in the company who kind of bridge that gap. So I was just wondering why there was not enough topic regarding application security.
It's mainly a function of who submits
and who accepts.
And well, and who accepts, yeah. Who hits the accept button, not necessarily who we choose to accept. I don't think there's too much bias in it. It's just I don't remember that there were a ton of security talks submitted.
There was not.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and so also it looks like we have a volunteer to submit one next year.
Yeah, I can do that. I can do that.
So the question is, how do we encourage that in this community to submit more? Because I think that's an issue around a lot of different things, not just security, having a diverse group of speakers and other things like that as well. I think part of it, the onus is on us, is to give like topic areas of what we want to see, and like we should probably be a little bit better and mindful in the CFP of saying, this year we want to focus on these things, or we're really interested in talks that are in this area and things like that. So that might be a way to improve that.
Community here, which is very active. Security MBA, ISMA, the reality is
I have 2 points of feedback. First was actually a question. So since you brought it up on the fantastic illustrations that were being made, will those be posted anywhere? I saw there were pictures being taken.
Yes. Yeah, so there's a ton of photos that the photographer took, and then there's these as well. Hopefully we got or she's going to clean them up and then take a photo. Okay.
Yeah, we also,
and
Ashton
so
still gives the high res, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll get high res
Yeah.
photos of them for the website to pass
and
around.
probably a great thing to do is we could link them off of the videos when we publish the videos as well. Yeah, and your second one?
The other point, I think just a little bit more calibration at the beginning. So in terms of the layout, I know the second day, obviously, we talked more about pointing out the map for the location, the rooms. Something initially at the beginning would have been helpful, especially because some of the signs were a little bit hard to see, especially, when people are milling around. You can't see some of the room names or even know that's the hallway to go down.
Yeah, we saw that yesterday, and we had tried to iterate on that for day 2. One of the things John pointed out was like needing maps and other stuff like that as well. Somebody pointed out to me yesterday as well of having plasmas, or are they still plasmas? Is that what we call them? Screens, as they are, with like what's happening now, right? And then being able to cycle through between like the map and what's happening now. That's all, I think, like a technology thing that we would have to solve, but we can probably figure that out pretty easily. There's 2 hands over here. We'll go with you first. Where's the microphone? Oh, we got a mic over there first. So we're going to yield to the gentleman with the mic.
Just like to
Yeah, thank you. And I think some of us were a bit frazzled with the overwhelming registration area. And then it was time to get on stage and we didn't know what to say. I know I was when I got up there. Yeah.
So regarding people submitting for next year, one thing that might help would be to provide mentoring available for people to help them. Because there's a lot of people who have valid things to say, but they are either intimidated by writing a proposal, or, some people are just like, this is just what I do. It's not that important. And I don't know how we can solve that problem. But at least if we remove barriers to people submitting talks, I think that would help.
Yeah, and like if we had maybe a local meetup where people could practice talks and things like that. I don't know. Is there one?
There is indeed one. Well,
No.
I think he was talking about the DevOps meetup. The DevOps meetup. Oh, by the way, hi.
Yeah, so I would definitely encourage you, if you're a first-time speaker and you don't have the experience, you would be probably pleasantly surprised about how speakers are more than willing to help other speakers out, especially first-time speakers. It is something that's done at Devopsdays Minneapolis. Bridget, the main organizer of that group and one of the core organizers, she does a lot of mentoring and helping it out. We don't offer that up, and we probably should, but if you are a first-time speaker, meetups are a great place to go and get started in a safe, comfortable environment where you can fail without fear. Smaller group, 15, 20 people and things like that. And there is DevOps Columbus, but you can also go to other meetups to try and give talks as well.
Lots for Columbus is scheduling 2019 or 2020 right now.
To the League of Professional Sysadmins. Yes, you.
And I have just two things I wanted to mention. So I think maybe offering some kind of intimate kind of drawing outside would be nice, so that people, when they come in, maybe there'll be like a mural where they could maybe fill in, some stuff with color, or maybe like write their name or something, just to kind of tie everything together.
Yeah.
Just, make it feel like everyone participated a little bit. And the other thing, please bring back the massages next year.
Awesome.
Yeah, so if you are going to use this event space again next year, I would ask that maybe you see if there's a different podium that we can use, because that thing's pretty imposing, and it's got stuff in the way of the face of the speaker, depending on where you sit in the audience. And I think it would make for a more engaging presentation if there was less podium and more speaker visible.
Okay. Is there? You still want?
I'm right here.
Go ahead.
You're
Okay,
good.
it's you.
This is my first time here, and I wanted to comment on your food, that your food service for breakfast and lunch, and even especially the happy hour afterwards, was excellent. There was a lot of variety. I mean, you had coffee, you had water, you had soda in the morning. There are people like myself that do not drink coffee, so we appreciate I at least appreciated the caffeine of another source in the morning. And your happy hour last night from the food, I was over the top overwhelmed, because I didn't expect anything near what you had for food and whatever. I assume that's part of because you have so many sponsors, but I expected, very, meatballs and things like that, and your food was over the top. I mean, if people drank, that was good too. And then I didn't go to your second happy hour, but I thought that was nice that you encouraged people. I don't know what the demographics of the people that came are, but you gave someone, if they were from out of town, someplace to go to talk more informally, I'm sure, at another event. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the positive feedback. And also, we did get some less than positive feedback about the vegetarian options as well, especially today. So I see several thumbs down. We apologize for that. We were trying to account for it, but I think just another item we need to review for next year.
That we probably can't help
Come
with.
on, Josh.
Eat it as you run around the building.
Yeah. Sherry, you want to?
I would just say I appreciate having the space for people to work. As much as all of us have out of office messages in our inbox right now, we all know that people don't care that it says you're out of office. So I appreciate having a space to kind of go and still sort of be here,
but dip out for a minute to, answer.
Yeah,
whatever.
and wait until those people come in here before you do the raffle. That was the other point of feedback we got. Because that person who won the iPad was actually over in the other room watching the raffle happen and then started to sprint over. And of course, that was a minute ago when his name was called. And we had moved on to like 3 other sponsors. So we're going to make that right with him somehow as well.
A little bit of positive feedback here. In years past, there's been a problem where people were talking out back, and that noise would easily filter into the crowd here. This year was much better. There was one case where there were some people talking behind this door here that kind of got in the way here, but just wanted to say that it was much better this year. I don't know if you guys paid attention to that or not, but yeah.
Yeah, I did notice it a few times. And if we would have had the double doors closed, that's why you do those double doors to try and help with that. But I'm glad that that problem was fixed because that was a major point of negative feedback about the Bluestone venue. So we've had a lot of questions around the slides. We will make them available if the speaker makes them available. The easiest thing to do is to try and just look at the speaker's Twitter feed because they usually have posted them and tweet them out via speaker deck or SlideShare or something like that. Do we link them off of the program page and the historical site? Yeah, so if we get links, we will actually link on the 2019 program and in the video.
Video links are guaranteed. You'll always be able to watch the video. We may do the slides.
If we get them from the speaker. We will send an email out of like, we would like your slides, but I'm a horrible speaker. I never send out slides. I apologize. Any other things before we wrap up?
I'm really interested in any feedback about the event venue itself. The goods, the not so goods, where we could make it. I see a lot of thumbs up. Thumbs up are fun, but the only way we can improve is if we hear the things that we can do better. So if there's anything that you think we can do better with this space, I would certainly like to hear it. Boom. Okay.
So we technically did. We sent out an Eventbrite email on Sunday morning with all kinds of information, and we had free parking bolded. But from what I'm getting, a lot of people apparently didn't see that, didn't get it.
Well,
I'm guessing
the
it.
question that I wanted to ask was, did you get the email? Because okay, and part of the challenge is there's a little bit of that happens and work email and things like that. And then also, it very well could be that Eventbrite being picked up by spam filters somewhere along the lines, which maybe we need to figure out some other domain or something like that to send the email from.
Yeah, I was actually wondering if we can get a devopsdays.org to send from.
Oh, or we could just put a sign on it. Jeez. Yeah.
If we got the guidebook app earlier, we could probably put something for parking in the app, and just when people click on it, it'll show the areas, and just say it's free parking here.
Yeah. Yeah. That is one of the things we asked over and over again, and we wanted to make sure that was very clear to the attendees because anybody who's ever visited a campus knows that it's not free to visit the campus.
Yeah, concerning the parking, the web page for DevOps Days does have some parking info. It didn't mention that it was free. It just said, hey, this is how you get here, and then there was more information. So that would probably be a good place because that's what I checked before I came.
Okay, that's good. Yeah.
And I don't know how much control you guys could have over this, but maybe not having stuff right outside the door, moving registration or moving some of those booths, just because there was times when I was sitting back there and just kind of the people coming in and out made it very loud. And I think it kind
Yeah,
of contributed to congregation.
People were chit-chatting back there.
Right outside the doors.
Maybe just a couple more and we can wrap it up. Yeah.
You were talking about the email that went out from Eventbrite. I know in my case there was one person that bought the tickets for the 9 of us from my workplace that were here. They would most likely have been the one getting that email, not the 9 of us. So.
Yeah, but if they were lazy and just copy and paste their own thing all the way over, yeah.
Cool. I think we're done.
Would a push notification from Guidebook make people mad? I hate push notifications on a lot of my things. Right? If we changed app there.
Full disclosure, I turn off notifications on every app the moment I install it.
So one thing
I'm not your normal person.
One thing that
though.
Lucy and I talked about is sometimes we wanted to have a gong to indicate the bell change, right? If we did some pushing from Guidebook to ping people's phones and let them know that things were happening, that might be an interesting thing to try.
We were starting back up, especially with the 11:30 talk. We were starting back up, and there were a ton of people that were still on break, and like I walked through and be like, "Hey, you're welcome to talk, but just let you know the talk's starting back up. We need like a little chime or harp or something." Oh yeah, yeah.
So just a little housekeeping. If you have any drinks that you see in here that's on, bottles or whatever, if you don't mind picking them up,
Yeah, technically,
we'd really
we're not
appreciate
supposed
that.
to have food or beverage in here, so we've been breaking the rules. But
Many thanks to the Fawcett Center for letting us break that rule.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So thank you everyone for coming.
And if you guys want a shirt before you leave, come down and grab them. Otherwise, we'll have to store them in someone's garage again. Please come take them.